And we are visiting with whom?
Bud Holchek.
Bud and?
Richard Johnston.
Okay, Richard Johnston. Bud, tell us a little bit about your background in World War II.
Well, like Richard and Paul Meyer back there, we were fighter pilots in the P-38 Lightning that traversed mostly through England, France, Belgium, and Germany doing close support for the ground troops, dive bombing, strafing, etc. We did some work with the bombers, escorting them and then coming back and doing that groundwork. But predominantly we were a fighter bomber group, strafing and dive bombing. So it was a nice time until you lost good friends like I did him. He was shot down. He was my roommate. And that was on Valentine's Day of 45. I don't know what else to tell you.
Well, let's talk to you. What was it like being shot down?
Simple word, unpleasant, scary. It's a shame to get your first parachute jump that way. It'd be more fun to have some training for parachute jumping. It'd be more fun to have a whole parachute too, and I didn't.
Now, when you were shot down, was this over land, over water, what?
We were dive bombing and strafing in the Cologne area in Germany, and I was hit by light flak at a low altitude, and I set on fire. But I had enough speed dive bombing to pull up to altitude, and at altitude I was hit by, we don't know what. Everybody says probably it had to be an 88 millimeter flak shell, but it didn't explode. It came between me and my armor plating, took off my canopy, cut off my seat belt, and I found out after I bailed out, took 4 consecutive panels out of my parachute. So it wasn't tremendously fun to bail out under those circumstances. I was lucky enough to land in this town of Brühl, Germany, in the backyard where somebody the day before in February had dug it up a couple of feet deep and planted cabbages and flooded it. And I just sort of disappeared into a swamp and didn't hurt myself much. But anyway, that's it.
How long were you missing before somebody found you and got you out of there?
Well, the Germans found me immediately. I came down about a block and a half from a station where they picked me up and took me in. And 4 old guys just had a lot of fun beating the hell out of me for 3 days. And they all ended up in prison camp. I filed a war crimes deposition against them after the war. I memorized their names. They didn't know I spoke any German, so they were quite free. And I got the War Crimes Commission wrote me 2 or 3 years later and gave me their names again and said they had all gotten, and they told me the sentences, how long, and so forth. But then from there on I was in prison camps, and the only really bad thing about thing is the Germans were starving to death too. I lost 52 pounds in 3 months. That didn't get shot down again.
That's a good thing. Tell us again, Bud, with you, what is your most memorable experience?
You know, it's almost impossible to separate them. There are those that might say they were not afraid of what they were doing. It was not fun flying through the amount of flag that they put up. But I have no one experience in the missions that I flew, other than some missions were we call milk runs. They were few and far between. The most memorable experience to me is every time we had to fly down through the flak to dive bomb and strafe, because you knew there were 1,000 people trying to kill you. Whereas with aerial combat, you didn't have that. It was you versus a person. But our planes brought us back most times, unless you got your rear end shot off like he did. But they brought us back in most instances with holes. And we had 2 engines. So consequently, it was a good plane to fly for what we did.
You had mentioned that you knew each other back in the day. What was it like for you to know that your buddy had been shot down?
Well, He was my third buddy. We had a room with 2 people, and I lost one, and then lost a second one, and he was the third one, and I thought the good Lord kept holding me up there. So, as I joked with him after we found each other about 3 years ago, the first thing we did is went through all of his stuff to send home, and the only thing that I kept his jacket and had it modified to an Eisenhower jacket. So I told him I owe him a jacket, a dress jacket.
The 4th 74th started having these reunions like this one clear back 25 or 30 years ago, and they had me listed as dead the whole time. And I didn't know they existed as an organization, and they didn't know I was even alive until about 2.5 years ago, and I found them. They didn't find me. I have a daughter who lives in Baltimore, and Francis came from Baltimore, and one day, just out of a clear blue sky, I called my daughter and I said, "Sherry, can you check all the Baltimore area directories and see if you can find a Francis G. Holochek?" She called me back the next day, and I called him, and we've talked to each other every month ever since then, and this is my 3rd year to come to this reunion. So I was happy enough to find them.
Wonderful.
Unfortunately, after 90% of them had already died. But there's one of them sitting right over here. Paul Meyer, who was one of our hotshot pilots in the 428.
And you were going to say something, bud.
It's gone.
It's gone.
It's gone.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your service, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not going to say it was a pleasure doing it.